Hello and welcome back to the Fighting Talk 2 channel with myself, Mr. Fighting Talk, aka Connor. Joined as always by the fantastic co-hosts of the show, George and Prath, the funny casual and the eloquent analyst. There you go. I got it right this time. Today we are joined by a very good friend of the show. We are joined by Maddog MMA. How we doing, Brian?
Great. Nice to talk to you guys again.
Always a pleasure, man. Always a pleasure. And I'm loving the TV behind you. It's on brand. I'm just a big fan of it.
Right on. I'm glad you guys like it.
And of course, I have got a Fighting Talk 2 beanie as well. We're staying on brand. We're staying on brand. But today, we are going to be talking about the GOAT. The pink unicorn that is the GOAT. Everyone's got their opinions on who the GOAT is, whether we have a gender-specific GOAT, whether we have a male GOAT and a female GOAT. Is there a pound for pound GOAT, and how it works? Just the word GOAT I see on social media so much. And it seems to be a flavor of the week as well. You know, Corey Sandhagen knocks out Frankie Edgar. Corey's the GOAT. You know, Derek Lewis knocks out Curtis Blades. Derek Lewis is now the GOAT. And it just seems to be a week on week on week. It just seems to be the same thing all the time. So we're going to be discussing a little bit about what the GOAT means to us, because it is a personal thing. Okay, Prath, I already know who it is. It's probably the name on everyone's lips as well when you think of who the GOAT is. But tell us who your GOAT is and why. What makes them the GOAT? What defines the GOAT?
So I think it's pretty clear to people who watch our podcast to know that George St Pierre to me is the greatest fighter of all time. You know, I think one of the points that some of the other guys here are going to make is that, you know, all time being up until this point. And I think some of these other guys are going to talk about what the future might look like for the greatest of all time when it comes to mixed martial arts. But for me, what I look at is dominance. I look at what the person has kind of carried themselves in and out of the octagon, and also the way that they won their fights, right? So George St. Pierre, let's look at him, right? George St. Pierre won, I would say, probably, I think he's got the most title fight victories in the UFC, maybe alongside Jon Jones as well. George St. Pierre is just a model citizen, human being, and also just an absolute savage in the cage. Like this was the guy that was the gentleman outside of the octagon and the savage inside. And I think for me, the thing that kind of makes him the GOAT is his adjustments over the years as well. He knew that he wasn't the best wrestler, and he took the time and kind of targeted that specifically. And I think the thing that also makes George kind of stand out for me is the way that he was able to kind of incorporate a lot of different things into martial arts and really open the doors to like gymnastics being a part of a martial arts kind of foundation. You know, most people will kind of go with wrestling being like, here's the best kind of base for an MMA fighter is to be a wrestler. And I think what he proved is, yeah, that's a really great thing to have as your pedigree, but also like gymnastics and having a strong core and having good plyometrics kind of makes a difference in these fights. His ability to take down, his ability to adjust on the dime. He's had fights where he's been nearly knocked out and come back. Look at Carlos Condit, right? Carlos Condit nearly dropped him with that head kick and finished him. He was able to come back and take that victory. And I think the other thing as well that you got to look at is the opponent, right? So I think a lot of the consensus of the general internet would be Jon Jones based off of his resume. And I think while Jon Jones has kind of made himself, he's had really good matchups to kind of elevate him to that GOAT status. George St. Pierre was kind of never really handed someone that was easy at that time, right? Contextually, if you look at someone like Josh Koscheck now, you know, obviously he is washed up and he's not the fighter he used to be per se, right? But back in the day when George St. Pierre was the champion, like he was the next one on the chopping block ready to go. Look at Dan Hardy. Dan Hardy was the best British prospect that we had. He went out there and got dominated by GSP, man. So for me, GSP not only dominated every single person in the octagon, not only had the most well-rounded skill set, but was also a flipping gentleman. So for me, he ticks all three boxes for me to be the MMA GOAT, because it doesn't just mean what they did in the octagon. And that's why I don't give it to Jon Jones, because if it was just purely based off of what they did in the octagon, Jon Jones would be the best pound for pound fighter of all time. You know, I hate the word pound for pound because, you know, Mighty Mouse is never fighting Jon Jones. That's also another person I consider the next other GOAT is Mighty Mouse. I think without a doubt, one of the greatest fighters of all time. Resume, finishes. he doesn't get credited for near the amount of finishes that he has. The amount of submissions he has is ungodly. And, you know, that's not even just including the one that he did on Ray Borg, where he flipped him up and then put him in the armbar. But man, for me, GSP just showed what it is to be an athlete, what it is to be a mixed martial artist, and what it is to be a champion in life. And if I had a kid, I don't have a kid, but if I had a kid, I would want them to be modeled off of GSP.
So you say GSP is the GOAT, right? And a lot of people would say he is the GOAT. But what about Usman? Usman has done more inside the octagon. He's fought very, very similar echelon of fighters that GSP would have fought in his day. Is it because he's retired? You know, GSP is obviously retired. Do you become the GOAT after you're retired? Would you say you have an active GOAT and then you have a retired GOAT? Do you know what I mean? Because if you were to look at musicians and stuff, usually they're super famous, and artists, for instance, painters, whatever, they usually become more famous after they're either dead or retired or, you know, out of the game.
Wow, that's actually a really, really interesting point, Connor, man. And it's a really good way of thinking about it, because I think when you just throw out casually the question of who do you think is the GOAT in MMA, I think everyone can take a very different approach to what that means to them. And for me, yeah, I would say that, you know, now looking at the kind of overall look at his career, he never really you know, he didn't take a huge amount of damage. The only one he really took a huge amount of damage in was the Johnny Hendricks fight, which was very disputable, but he still won at the end of the day. You know, cut away the bullshit of what people's opinions are. He still won that fight on the judges' scorecards on that night, right? So for me, I do agree, actually. And I think there is a kind of like a past GOAT, and that's the way that I look at it. There's kind of like a past GOAT and what would eventually be the future GOAT of MMA. But I think what he has done in the sport to propel it forward, what he did for Canada as well, like bringing the big venues. I think he fought in, you know, next to Israel against Robert Whittaker. That was the second biggest event of all time, was GSP versus Jake Shields, and classic event. And that was all carried on George St. Pierre's back. He, you know, he did the majority of the pushing for the UFC in Canada. And now, obviously, UFC in Canada is one of the biggest sports out there. And that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for George St. Pierre. He is a pioneer of allowing Canadian mixed martial artists to really shoot for the stars and really kind of reach that next echelon of fighter, man. So I think from that point of view, and his influence, and not only his influence, but his willingness to give as well. Like, he is one of those guys that is in TriStar, helping these guys, helping Ayman Sahabi, helping Rory McDonald, helping, any number of these TriStar fighters. So I think that for me is what really sums it up. You know, who they are in the cage, who they are out of the cage. What their record looks like, what their finishes look like, what they've done to really grind through some of these fights. Because you never know with some of these fights, you know, what injuries and things like that happen. But he still won. He won pretty much every goddamn time. And the fights that he did lose, he was able to avenge, right? He lost to Matt Hughes. He won against Matt Hughes. I think that for me shows what he, you know, that again shows he's taken something like a loss, which is very devastating. Imagine as well, he was in the peak. I would say he was about to reach the peak of his career, right? And he took that loss to Matt Hughes. He then came back, beat everyone after that, and regained his title, won it off of Matt Hughes. I think he beat him again a time after that as well. Like, that for me just shows that that's someone that has taken a loss, he's bounced back from it, he's adjusted not in his own life as well, but, you know, his training regimen as well. What other things that he's added to his game? You know, he was going to Joe Rogan and doing spinning back kicks in California, when who would have given Joe Rogan even a bit of credit? Now, knowing how good Joe Rogan is at doing a spinning back kick, George St. Pierre was with the right person. He was with the master of the spinning back kick. That's why I love it, because as well, he's going to the masters of every single discipline to be the best, right? He went to Renzo Gracie. He went to Jackson Wink. He went to Colorado. He went to all of these facilities and trained with all of these amazing guys, right? So I think for the time that he was there, and I would say for me as well, and this is why I think I'm biased a little bit towards George St. Pierre as well, is I know that he was kind of like at the meat of my MMA viewing experience, I would say, when he was really at the top of the heap and he was fighting, you know, the Josh Koscheck's, now hindsight 2020, towards the end of Josh Koscheck's career, but still was able to dominate and go out there and prove that he is, they look at him and think that he's not really as much of a, a strong fighter as he is, but he goes out there and just dominates everyone, man. So yeah, I think I don't know if I answered your question there, but there you go.
You did. You answered it about 35 times within the speech that you were giving. Now, I get that. And me and Brian have spoken about this before as well, and with regards to people, how they act outside of the octagon and how much they put back into MMA in general. I think if you can put back into something that you've gained so much from, it automatically puts you into contention for being, even the greatest of all time with regards to being a fighter, but also the greatest of all time with regards to how you're elevating the sport and how you're elevating other people. Brian, tell me, who's your GOAT? And please tell me it's not going to be GSP.
I hate to break it to you guys, but it is GSP. He had 9 title defenses, and he was also came back and won the middleweight championship against your guys' countryman, Michael Bisping. But the thing is that you have Jon Jones, who's virtually undefeated, right? The only defeat he has is the 12-6 elbow against, I think it was Matt Hamill, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm still calling for that rematch. You have 11 title defenses right there. He's going to move up to heavyweight, and I think that he's going to have success there, but it is about what you've done outside of the octagon as well. So you have somebody like Jon Jones who has had trouble, who's failed drug tests, who's been in, wrecks and DUIs and stuff like that. But, that's outside of the octagon. So when we talk about GOATs, right, we have to talk about what they did inside the octagon. And what Jon Jones has done inside the octagon is great so far. But I don't think that it is as good as GSP. Now, if you also look at Anderson Silva, that's another one that can come up. 10 title defenses. Demetrius Johnson, 11 title defenses. But like Connor and I have talked about, there are subdivisions of greatness in this sport. And I think that people are they are very quick to forget the early pioneers of this sport. I look at Gracie, Coleman, Pat Miletich, Shamrock, Randy Couture, who, he's Randy Couture, who's a multiple time heavyweight and light heavyweight champion. Then you have like the mid era. I call it the mid era. You have Tito Ortiz. I know a lot of people don't agree with, how he is, but you have Tito Ortiz, you have Chuck Liddell. And we were talking earlier that right now, if Chuck Liddell came into this division, in the light heavyweight division right now, he probably wouldn't do much. But at the time, he was great. You have Randy Couture still in that mid, BJ Penn, Matt Hughes, and this is going to surprise some people, but Tim Sylvia. I mean, that dude, he was a great heavyweight at the time, when he fought. And then you also have like the late era, I think, GSPs, the Anderson Silva's, the DJ, Demetrius Johnson, Jones, Jose Aldo, and Cain Velasquez. But it's to that point is if you put the MMA in a vacuum right now and you stop it at 258 or, UFC Vegas 19, if you stopped it then and then went back and looked at everything, you have an endless argument of who really is the greatest. Because, I mean, it's not just the UFC. We're talking about different promotions too. We're talking about Pride. You know what I mean? We're talking about One. We're talking about a lot of promotions that you have to take into account.
No, absolutely. And you said actually about Gracie, right? Royce Gracie he had the quickest route to getting a belt. In UFC 1, he had 3 fights on that one night, and that was the quickest that anyone has ever gained a UFC belt. Mm-hmm. And it's one of these kind of foundations of the sport that, unless you look back, and quite a lot of MMA fans now are kind of in the Conor McGregor era. They've kind of been fans for the past 5-6 years maybe. when he really came big and did so much for the sport. But then if you look back at what these other guys have done, exactly as you said, the BJ Penns, but if you look at him, I think he's lost 8 of his last 9 fights. So he's almost had 2 parts to his career. And he beat up his girlfriend or his wife, or he hit some like old person in a bar or something. I don't know what he did, but he's doing stuff outside of the octagon that would never put him into contention of being a GOAT, in my opinion. And the both of you have gone for GSP so far, but have you got a female GOAT, or is there just a pound for pound GOAT with regards to any gender? It's not gender specific, sorry. Would you consider there to be a female GOAT and a male GOAT? And would it be how much they've done for the sport or what they're achieving outside of the octagon? Because obviously women's MMA, as we've discussed on the channel before, is obviously a few years kind of behind the males, for instance. But George, what about you, man? Have you got a female GOAT, or are you just sticking with the male GOATs?
I don't know, there should be a conversation for a female GOAT, of course, but I do wonder whether it's still kind of developing forwards. I mean, I suppose you're picking from a smaller pool, aren't you, of potential female GOATs. I mean, I guess the obvious pick would be Amanda Nunes, but, there will be other arguments in there, but I certainly feel that probably needs to play out for a couple more years until there's like...
She would be the GOAT for me. For me, she would be the GOAT because she's had 2 belts.
Yeah, totally. And, and she has been... she has been dominant, hasn't she? She has, when she's got inside of there, she has, she does look unstoppable. Obviously, somebody thinks that Megan Anderson might win soon.
But hold on,
is it you?
Now hold on. Let's Amanda Nunes is great. She is an amazing female athlete who has won multiple division belts and is just gone on a tear. But let's look at somebody that's really put female MMA on the map. And I know that a lot of people are, because of how she is outside of the ring and everything, but Ronda Rousey. Okay, Ronda Rousey came in. She was in the Strike Force. She was champion over there. Dana White says we'll never have female fighting in the UFC. And then when he found his star, the Ronda Rousey, he started this, the female fighting over there in the UFC. And then she goes on a tear. 6 title defenses, amazing rivalry with Miesha Tate. Of course, obviously, when she got smoked by Holly Holm, it kind of tarnished her reputation. But before that, she was somebody that was unstoppable. And I know that when Amanda Nunes comes up and knocks her out on December 30th, 2000, and I think it was 2016. When she came and knocked her out, that it was just, people said, she's done. And right, we're okay with that. But somebody's going to do that to Amanda Nunes too. I don't know if it's going to be Megan Anderson, but somebody will eventually come up and do that to Amanda Nunes as well.
But was Ronda Rousey, she obviously did quite a lot for the sport, and we all appreciate that she did a lot for the sport because she, as you say, she brought female mixed martial arts into the UFC, etc. But would you consider her the GOAT because of the time frame that she was in? There was no one else there. If you just created a sport, for instance, of course you're going to be the best at it because no one else has ever done it before. So you're going to be the greatest at that time. Where exactly like you said, if we put the UFC into a vacuum now, Amanda Nunes would be considered the GOAT because she's the only female to get 2 different belts. The way she won against Cyborg and the way she won against Ronda, and the kind of damage, and Holly Holm even catching her with the left high kick, which is just crazy, and how she's beaten these women as well has got to put her in contention. But for me also, she went away and she had a kid. I think it's lovely when fighters spend a bit of time developing their own lives outside of the octagon. She's obviously found the one she wants to be with in life. She's like, you know what? I'm not going to take the Megan Anderson fight 6 months ago because my kid with super cute fluffy hair needs a bit of loving. And you know, for me, I really like that, and I really enjoy that people take time out of their, you know, because she's in the prime of her life, right? She took time out of her prime to put it into something else, and I think that's really, really lovely. Hit me up, George.
The only other one who might get into the conversation when it's all said and done is Valentina.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. But then she lost against Nunes twice.
She has.
They were very, very close fights, right?
Yeah.
So, like in the first Valentina fight, you know, ended the third round, we were thinking, okay, if there was a fourth round here, Valentina's got this. But, you know, ended in the 3-round fight. In the rematch, very tentative on both sides. It was a bit of a hard fight, really, to kind of put that title on that winner of that fight. And I think that's kind of what people were expecting to happen when she did win those fights. And I got to speak on Ronda as well. Like, absolutely love what Ronda did for the sport. But the first time that she was matched up against someone that was really legitimate, she got smoked by Holly Holm on that head kick. And Holly Holm is someone that should deserve a lot of credit as well. You know, multiple-time boxing champion before she came in, even before she came to mixed martial arts, man. So big props to Ronda. Big props to Holly. Big props to Ronda as well. Like she did open some doors for a lot of these people to be able to at least even go into a gym and do it. Like you can imagine, even before that, there was not many women that were in MMA gyms trying to pursue that dream. And for Ronda Rousey to show that you can go to the big level and do that, you know, opened up the eyes for a Sarah McMahon, you know, an Olympic silver medalist who in her own right is a badass. Kayla Harrison, who is a badass, and allows these people to open up and allow themselves to really reach their full potential as well. Like, I think when they stop at the Olympics, it really stops them from being able to show what they truly are made of. Because I think while the Olympics is great, and obviously it brings the premier athletes from across the world, you don't really get to see the way that they're able to deal with pressure quite the same as when they're in these pay-per-view fights. And obviously Ronda ate pressure like diamonds, and you know, big respect to her. Amanda will always go down as the GOAT just purely based off of the wins that she has had. I think it's undeniable and undisputed, man. And I think the only person that, and I got to agree with George, the only person that's really in contention other than that is Valentina, of which I would love to see a third fight, because that second one for me just left me very dissatisfied and didn't give me an answer. And I think as well, it was really before they hit their proper stride. Amanda, after that, really hit her stride and really started becoming, you know, who she is now. So, and Valentina, like, you know, sky's the limit for someone like Valentina, who has gone down to flyweight and has just absolutely taken over that division. So for me, the women's GOAT is going to be I'm going to be a little bit on the fence here and say that I think once that a third Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko fight goes down, then we can, you know, instead of putting the belts on them or the 2 belts on them or the 1 belt on them, they're just going to put a crown on their head and go, okay, well, you're the greatest of all time. Have a good life.
And Prath, you brought up a great point about, you know, when you said titles, you know what I mean? Instead of titles, let's put a crown on a person's head. You know, do we judge a person's GOAT status in title, how many titles they've carried, with George St Pierre holding 2 titles with the welterweight and the middleweight. Anderson Silva, he hasn't held 2 titles or anything. DJ hasn't held 2 titles. But then we talk about people like Vanderlei Silva. We talk about people like Shogun, who have won Grand Prix over in Pride and then came over and used those skill sets and have won titles over in the UFC. You know, so you have GOAT status, but is GOAT status always is it always judged by titles and how many people hold? George, what do you think?
Oh man, this was a really tough one. I've been thinking about this one for a while, and of all the names that have been mentioned, I consider them all: GSP, Jon Jones, Mighty Mouse, all of the guys. And I can't believe I'm saying this because of certain out of the cage issues, but I'm going to go for Jon Jones.
Doesn't surprise me.
And I'll explain why.
Here comes the casual guys.
No,
Welcome to Casual Corner with George.
I'll carry on now. The main reason why is obviously inside what he's done inside is obviously dominance, but it's more, for me, a big thing about a GOAT is someone who can overcome adversity in their life to try and rebuild themselves to come back and perform at the highest level possible. You know, I feel like people have to go through something to kind of find their way back. And Jon Jones, for me, has done that. What he has done, obviously, he's my DUI brother, but he's obviously done some bad things outside of the cage, and he's had a bit of a few problems down the line. But he seems to be on that kind of narrow path now, coming back. You know, obviously at heavyweight now, and obviously he's done light heavyweight. You know, no one's really got close apart from Matt Hamill. But
rematch incoming.
But for me, I think a combination of everything: the dominance at light heavyweight, I really do put something heavy on like adversity in life and coming back from adversity in life, and the opportunity now to potentially become a champ, which is he has got a great opportunity to do. I think all of the combination of factors make him you know, whether you want to call it casual or not, makes him a genuine consideration for a GOAT. You know, it was so close between him and GSP, but in the end, I can't believe I did it, because obviously I have been quite brutal about this, like drug use thing, but I ended up siding with him because I just think that when it's all said and done, people will have to respect what he has done inside the octagon, and also to rebuild his life outside of it. I think he does deserve some form of credit for that.
He was also the youngest ever UFC title holder. Right?
Completely, yeah, absolutely. You know, title holder as well. So, yeah, there's loads of reasons why Jon Jones should be recognised as it, in my opinion.
No,
would you guys consider Daniel Cormier a GOAT?
But he comes from a wrestling background, right? And you come from a wrestling background. So naturally, you were going to think this guy is the GOAT. And I was actually going to bring this up earlier when we were talking about holding 2 belts and, you know, defending titles, etc., etc. And that's what makes this GOAT conversation so difficult, because Daniel Cormier, he held 2 belts. He lost a belt. He got it back, blah, blah, blah. But then he got beaten by Jon Jones. So it's like, would Jon Jones then take over being the GOAT because he beat the GOAT? I don't know. It's so difficult, and this is why I think that GOAT conversation and the amount of times we've said GOAT is unbelievable. The greatest of all time conversation is it's a never-ending goal to achieve. You know, it is a pink unicorn that you are chasing across a never-ending platform of, you know, a desert. Do you know what I mean? You're never going to be able to get a GOAT and everyone agree on it. Do you know what I mean? There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, yeah, Jon Jones is the GOAT, or yeah, GSP is the GOAT, Amanda Nunes, etc. But then there's going to be a massive divide of people that think that this person is not the GOAT for one reason or another. Jon Jones didn't only face adversity the first time he did drugs. He hit someone with a car, and then he got caught doing drugs again, and then again, and then again. So he's faced adversity, but it's all things that he's done himself, and he's done numerous times. However much I think he is a fantastic fighter, I feel like what he's done outside of the octagon would take away his ability to be the GOAT. Do you know what I mean? But DC is a prime example for someone that's very, very good outside of the octagon as well. What do you think, Brian? Do you think he's a GOAT?
Who, Daniel Cormier? No, yeah. I don't think that he's the GOAT, but I think that he does deserve a shout out in this conversation. You know, he took this division, the light heavyweight division, under his wing when Jon Jones was out multiple times. Like I've said before, he's cleared out that division and decided to go up and knocked out Stipe. And of course, Stipe comes out and has won 2 rematches. But, you know, when I think about a GOAT, I do consider the outside life of somebody, you know, when I'm talking about the GOAT. And DC has always been on the up and up. I mean, he's taken under, you know, a kids coach, you know, he coaches his kids wrestling team. He does, you know, commentating for fights. He's a great ambassador for the UFC, for MMA. And even though he's been beat in the ring, you know, I think it's 3 times now, 4 if you count the no contest with John. you know, even though he's up there with me, you know, he's my wrestle brother, my wrestling brother, but you know, I think he does deserve to be up in that conversation. But so many people do. There are so many people that you can look at and say, this person does deserve to be in a conversation of a GOAT. And Connor, I think you've brought up this before, that, you know, now the younger kids are not kids. I don't mean kids, but the younger people are getting into this sport, and they're seeing people like Izzy. They're seeing people like they're seeing people like Jon Jones and all these guys, Khabibs, and they're just now getting into the sport, and that's always going to be their favorite person. Just like Pratt saying, hey, this was when George St Pierre was when I was really getting into MMA. So was I. You know what I mean? It's always the person, you know, who they love, and will always have a piece in their heart. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's actually like a football team or like a soccer team or whatever you want, you know, like whoever got you into MMA and said like, oh, why don't you watch this guy? Or why don't we support this team or something? You know what I mean? Yeah. If your dad's like, oh yeah, I support whatever team, then you just automatically start supporting that team because they got you into it. So it's almost like a popularity contest as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, for me, the DC is kind of like the champion of our hearts, right? He is what you would want a UFC champion to be, to model your kids after. Like I said about GSP, I mean, DC is basically in that same vein, right? Someone that's had to come back from a lot of adversity, is a champion in life in general, but also is an ambassador for the support, for the sport. He's commentating, he's on podcasts, he is doing detail, you know, he's adding so much to the sport, and he's adding so much knowledge to the sport. And the way that the way he does commentary is so much vastly different to the way that Jon Anik does it, the way that Joe Rogan does it, the way that, you know, even the Dominic Cruzes, the Paul Felders, the Michael Bispings, the way that they approach it as well. And I think what I found when I've watched MMA with, you know, casual fans or people that don't even watch it at all, is that they can listen to someone like Daniel Cormier, and he's breaking it down in such a way that it's so digestible. And I think it's only because of the experience that he's had within MMA, you know, an Olympic athlete, an MMA champion, someone that's taken losses and come back from them, someone who's had, you know, the Jon Jones saga as it is, you know, in a capsule alone, and the way that he had to come back from that, you know, the UFC 200 getting cancelled, like, was it 2 days before? You see that, the famous embedded footage of him getting that news from Dana White. And we all felt for DC, because DC, you know, that was his chance to really take over the top of the mountain. And what happened the second time that he did have that fight rescheduled with Jon Jones, it was so unfortunate that he was doing so well in that fight, and then he got stopped by Jon Jones. And so, you know, for that reason alone, you can't really give him the title. He's lost to Stipe, he's lost to Jon Jones, two guys that people do consider, you know, the MMA heavyweight GOAT and the MMA light heavyweight GOAT.
Yeah.
If you know, take away from the fact that you're doing the two divisions to be the actual champ, and say that they're the GOAT. So for me, DC is the champ of our hearts. He's the GOAT of our hearts, but is he the GOAT of MMA? Unfortunately not.
And that just goes back to what we were all talking about before with regards to subdivisions. You know, do you have a GOAT of each division? Do you have a greatest of all time from every single event that's ever been on, you know? And I think Israel Adesanya, as you touched on then, wants to solidify himself as being the greatest of all time with regards to taking 3 belts, for instance, you know, and it's having these kind of ambitions that really kind of push people forward, especially in the hearts and the minds of MMA fans and hardcores, that you think, wow, this guy really wants to rewrite this script on what it takes to be a GOAT, right?
Here's my opinion. I'm sorry, Pratt. Here's my opinion about that. Izzy came in at the right time, right? Mm-hmm. So back in the day with like the GSPs and the Jon Jones and the Anderson Silvas, the DJs, they stayed in their respective weight classes. They wanted to clear out that weight class because, you know, going up in weight meant to put on muscle, meant to, you know, maybe cut more weight if they wanted to go down. So, but Izzy's coming in at this champ time of the UFC. So, you know, when he comes in and sees Conor McGregor with all this, respect, and he sees Daniel Cormier coming to be the champ, Amanda Nunes be the champ. He says, well, shit, why can't I be champ? Why can't I go for it? He's young enough to do it. He's obviously fought at that weight class before with light heavyweight and the heavyweight. And I know it's in kickboxing, totally different terms, but he's done it before. And he's young enough to where he says, screw it, I'm going all in.
But then what about what he's done outside of the octagon, or even inside the octagon, with regards to what he did to Paulo Costa, for instance, when he dry humped him after they finished the fight? That is not a respectable thing. So if you were to put him in contention with regards to being the GOAT, about how he is as a person and how his persona is, dry humping a guy after you've just knocked him out doesn't really make you seem like the greatest of all time with regards to your showmanship and your like ring prowess. Do you know what I mean? You said about DJ. DJ was always very respectful to the people that he beat, and DC always very respectful. Whereas Israel Adesanya has come in with a level of disrespect that I think would gain quite a lot of following from the younger MMA fans.
I think the thing for me as well, before Brian jumps in, I'm going to jump in ahead of Brian here and just say that I think the thing for me when I look at someone like Israel Adesanya, right, I think his goals and ambitions far exceed wanting to be the MMA GOAT. I think the actual only reason why he wants to go up to heavyweight is just to fight Jon Jones. He doesn't want it. He doesn't care about a belt. He doesn't care about the heavyweight title belt. He doesn't care about the light heavyweight title belt. He wants to fight Jon Jones. And I think because
Jon Jones is the GOAT.
No, it's because Jon Jones is immature and he hates him. And I think Israel Adesanya looks at Jon Jones and goes, you are everything that I should be.
Yes.
And, I'm going to come and take everything from you. And I think that's why we love Izzy so much. And when we watch the Twitter exchanges between Jon Jones and Israel Adesanya, I think what you can take away from that most is that it's not like, I don't look at Izzy's tweets or look at the disparaging comments he makes against Jon Jones and go, oh, I think Izzy just wants to be, the light heavyweight champion or the heavyweight champion. I think Izzy wants to beat the shit out of Jon Jones. That's why he wants to go after the title, or, even make them move up to light heavyweight to then move up to heavyweight to fight Jon Jones. Like, he's a 185 pounder that makes 183 when he makes his title fights, right? He is not a heavyweight fighter, but he wants to beat up Jon Jones. So that's his way of doing it, right? He has to take the light heavyweight belt to show that he can go up to that weight class, hang with those individuals that can strike, that can give him that submission threat. And I think, for me, when I look at the matchup between him and Jan Blachowicz, I think that's a flipping phenomenal fight for him to really showcase, his kickboxing and his style of fighting. And I think that's what that is what is important to him. I don't think I can actually recall a time where Adesanya has actually discussed him being the MMA GOAT or what it takes for him to be the MMA GOAT. I think he goes out and thinks, okay, well, I've smashed everyone at middleweight. I'm going to go smash this guy at light heavyweight, who is the guy that everyone revered as the best. Oh, no, he's moving up to heavyweight. Well, I guess I'll smash this guy, and then I'll go smash that guy. And I think that's what will draw people to thinking that Adesanya is the GOAT, regardless of if he gets the title, right? I'm sure if he beat Jan Blachowicz and they didn't put a title around his waist, I don't think he would give a shit. And I think that's the same thing at heavyweight as well. I think until he beats Jon Jones, whether it's a title or not, I think that's what's really going to solidify for himself in his own mind that he is the greatest of all time, because he has taken out the guy that is regarded as the greatest of all time.
He knows he needs it though to be the GOAT. That's the thing, isn't it? He knows he needs to be considered it, and I think he does. I think he does want to be considered the GOAT. Izzy, I've definitely seen him mention it a few times that he wants to be, when it's all said and done, he wants to be considered the greatest to ever do it. And I think he knows that obviously becoming a champ would help do it. But I agree with you that I don't think he really cares about the belts. It's more about the people that he beats. But I think he knows that if you beat Jon Jones, that pretty much signs it off for you. At that point, then people will go, this is the kid. This is the guy who is the greatest to ever do it in mixed martial arts. And do you know what? He probably has. I think he's got a great chance beating Blachowicz. I think he's got a great chance. I think he has got this crazy plan to jump up to heavyweight, and I think he has got this idea that he is going to go and beat Jon Jones and solidify himself as the greatest to ever do it. So, and I wouldn't put it past him. To be honest, I wouldn't put it past him.
You heard it here first, guys. Adesanya beats Jones. Hold George to it. All the bets that you make, put the receipt to George.
and give Brian credit when Megan Anderson beats Amanda Nunes.
Yes.
You motherfucker.
You know what? What I was thinking of, we could actually talk about who the GOAT is for such a long time. It's a never-ending conversation. I think what we'll have to do is definitely jump on another episode and talk about maybe who we think is the future GOAT, because there's obviously a lot of people that over the next 3 to 5 years, for instance, will be solidifying themselves as the GOAT, because there's so many people to talk about. You know, not only in the UFC, but also in Bellator and ONE, and there's just so many promotions that have their own consideration of what the GOAT is as well. Some honorable mentions, I'm sure, as everyone would agree, would be Khabib, Max Holloway. These kind of guys are definitely going to be in GOAT contention, right? Brian, give me 5 other people that you would contend in the GOAT.
Okay, I'm gonna go. So GSP is my GOAT, right? I would say 5 other people would be Demetrius Johnson. I would say Fedor. I know that he was in Pride, but Fedor was great. I would say Vanderlei Silva. I'm a huge fan. That dude is just he was a monster back in. He was undefeated from '99 to 2005. You also have so what is that? That's 3 on top of GSP.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jon Jones is obviously in there. I think DC, but when there's just so many things that you have to take into it, like we've talked about this. There's just subdivisions of GOATs, and I love the sport. And I've said this before. I wish it wasn't GOAT. I wish it wasn't greatest of all time. I wish it was the greatest for their time. Because I think that in the end, when you look at people like BJ Penn or Matt Hughes or Gracie's or all these guys, you have to say, like, man, they might not do great now, but back in their time, they were unstoppable. People were building pay-per-views around these guys. I mean, BJ Penn was going up to 170 after going to 155 and doing all these crazy things. And people talk about, the best jab is Max Holloway, but people were saying that BJ Penn back in his day had the best jab in MMA. There's just so many things that you have to take into account for this GOAT talk. And so we say, okay, give me 5 other guys, but I could give you 25 other guys.
Prath, give me 5, man.
Oh man, I was trying to think about it here while our man Brian here was talking, because I didn't want to make some silly choices, but I kind of want to make some silly choices here as to who. And again, this is obviously very subjective. Everybody has a different opinion. Opinions are like assholes. So what I will say is that my number one, GSP in my heart is going to be number 1. I think what he's achieved in his career and who he is as a person is outstanding and a model human being. The next person I can think of that really has made a difference in the sport of mixed martial arts, I've kind of tied between 2 guys here. This is going to be kind of a tie between Mighty Mouse and Dominic Cruz. The reason why I'm putting Dominic Cruz is because he's obviously got a victory over Mighty Mouse and was probably one of the longest reigning champions of all time within that bantamweight division. And his style of fighting was way ahead of his time as well. And he has done something that is now what you're watching here is seeing a lot of the guys in 2021 employ a lot of the skills that Dominic Cruz was using in 2015, 2014, So for me, I think Dominic Cruz will always be arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time. And again, now you look at kind of the same way, like you look at DC, right? Look what he's done outside the octagon. He's a commentator. He is probably one of the smartest individuals when it comes to breaking down fights and being able to do it in a digestible way. And I think that's what makes him appeal to the audience, is that he is a very well-spoken gentleman, but also just explains it in a way that everyone can understand. So Dominic Cruz is up there. I'd be stupid to say Jon Jones isn't up there. I would also put Fedor in that category. I think one of the greatest of all time. His stretch in Pride is something that's unheard of in the UFC now. You don't really see anyone in the UFC do what he did back in Pride, and I think that's outstanding. PEDs and things like that. You know, who knows what was going on in Japan in those early days? Let's just say that. But for what he did, you know, and what he survived as well, I'm pretty sure he got dumped on his head by Randleman. You know, those are, you know, some of the most outstanding fight highlights that you see. You know, even see currently, you see it now. I see Calvin Randleman dropping Fedor in his head, and that's just such an outstanding moment because Fedor was able to come back and get the win still. Like, that's unbelievable. So yes, Fedor's up there, GSP's up there, Dominic Cruz is up there, DJ's up there. And I will say for me, one of the last ones that really, you know, long-standing champion, really did work in his division, Jose Aldo. I want to give it to him as well, because I think, you know, obviously Max came in and did work to Jose Aldo over 2 fights, really, really pieced him up. But again, if we're looking at what he did in his time, you know, the longest, he's like one of 3 other featherweight champions. And that's because he held the title from its inception till, you know, Conor McGregor got his hands on it and really changed the game. But that's a different conversation for a different day. So that for me would be my guys. So I've got, we've got GSP, we've got Dominic Cruz / DJ, we've got Jon Jones, we've got
Fedor and Jose Aldo.
Fedor and then Jose Aldo. Nice. Those are my guys.
George, from a casual point of view, who are your 5 GOATs?
My 5 GOATs are, one, my favorite fighter of all time, which isn't Jon Jones, thank you very much. It's Mighty Mouse. He's my favorite fighter.
He's going to say Manel Cape.
I knew. I thought it was coming.
Manel Cape, Aspinall, and Derek Lewis.
Kamaru Usman.
Hang on. Ease up. Demetrius Johnson, GSP. GSP, obviously. Fedor is 100% in there for what he's done in Pride, and, you know, as a whole, you know, fantastic. The last 2 are difficult, but I'm going to pick Amanda Nunes. And I'm going to go for someone a bit off-piste, but a guy who has completely and utterly devoted his life to the game. And I'm going to put Alistair Overeem as my last guy in there.
Nice.
That is very casual.
But you know what? Overeem would definitely have contention to be the greatest of all time within one of the subdivisions that we would talk about at some point, because he has fought over 4 different decades. Obviously, he started his in life in MMA in 1999, obviously. So he fought in the 90s, the 2000s, 2010, and 2000 and the 20s. So the guy has fought in a lot of different eras and has a lot of fans around the world. And what he did before he even got into mixed martial arts is insane. But we could literally talk about this for hours upon hours, you know. And this might be a 3-part series, or maybe even a 12-part series. Who knows?
Yeah.
Nevertheless,
I just
go on.
Can I say one more thing? Like, you know, when we talk about the GOATs, you know, we can go on and on about, you know, who we think is, but in reality, it's the person that really has pulled at your heartstrings, has gotten you pumped up for MMA fights, has gotten you, you know, just jolted for the sport. You know, I know Prath and I, we've talked about, you know, DC, you know, how when he came out and he does his slapping his chest. I mean, that's something that's in itself that gets you, that pumps you up, that pulls at your heart and makes you a fan of the sport. And while people want to sit there and say like, okay, you know, if we just, you know, say wins and losses and everything like that this person's the GOAT, you know, you can't really do that. It's the person that's made you fall in love with the sport. It's the person that gets you pumped up. It's the person that makes you love watching this thing. That's got to be your all-time GOAT.
Yeah.
And I think as well, it's kind of like the simple way out, right? Oh, this guy has all the wins and hasn't lost. He's the GOAT. And I think it's subjective. It's what you feel like is the GOAT. And I could not agree with you more, Brian. It's who made you feel like the most pumped up. And I've got to admit, DC, when he was slapping his chest, slapping his legs, he's about to run out, nothing better. It makes me want to just chuck this hat off and go for a run right now. Let's go.
Who's the motherfucker that makes you feel like you're the fucking GOAT? That's the real fucking problem. That's the real GOAT right there.
It's taken a while, but we've finally got to what it means to be the GOAT, and it's who makes you feel like the motherfucking GOAT. Yeah, is it Robert Whittaker slapping his chest, hitting himself on the shoulder? It could be anyone. It could be anyone, and that's why so many people love Conor McGregor and consider him the GOAT, not only because of what he's done in the octagon and his highlight reel, but it's how he carries himself and how he makes people feel. And obviously that's a very deep conversation for an MMA podcast. But nevertheless, thank you so much for joining in to the Fight and Talk 2 conversation about what it takes to be the GOAT. I definitely think it would be worth talking about who our future GOATs would be. I think that would be a conversation that we'll definitely be up for having at some point in the future. But as always, leave a comment to who you think your GOAT is, and if you agree with us, then let us know in the comments as well. Hit like, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and share with your friends, and just we're all in this because we love MMA, and we've been able to connect with people halfway across the world, which is absolutely fantastic from us as well. So, Brian, thank you very much for joining us. If you want to find Brian, he's over at Maddog MMA, and he'll be a featured guest on the show as well. So. We've always got time for Brian. And as always, thank you very much, George and Prath, for co-hosting the show as well. It's been an absolutely riveting conversation. And we'll see everyone soon. Thank you very much.
See you guys.